The Wisdom of Insecurity, it's like called like a message for an age of anxiety, which is funny because it's written in 1955 or something.
Yeah,
It's
way
so
before our current time, which is
relevant.
So yes, it's very, very relevant.
Like the things that he says, I'm like, you could just copy and paste this to 2024. It's so relevant. What I like about him the most is he's able to make you simultaneously understand that none of this matters and that it's going to be okay.
I kind of want to pivot over to one of your big influences, which is Alan Watts.
Oh,
and
God.
I was curious about, can you just, this is a very broad question, but can you just like share about your relationship with Mr. Watts, or Papa Watts, as you often refer to him?
Papa Watts. What I find interesting is that most people, like, you know how you'll have, I guess Alan is still pretty, I guess he's still kind of niche. But it's interesting that I'm sure you have this as well. We're kind of on the same wavelength. You'll have people that you study and you really think about a lot, and there's some sort of relationship with them. And to other people are like, who's Alan Watts? You're like, what do you mean who's Alan Watts? He's the basis for 22% of my personality. What do you mean? You know, it's such a big influence to one person to you can mean nothing to anybody else. Or you've been studying them for years and it's someone's first time hearing a Watts video or reading a book. I'm like, wow. Like, and then you realize that things that are niche are kind of that way for a reason. So Alan, I mean, I can't remember even the first time I read or encountered any of his works, but what I'll say about his work is that, and there's a beautiful book he wrote called The Wisdom of Insecurity, which is probably my favorite book by him.
Yeah, same.
You like that book?
Yeah, it's the one that I've gifted the most to people. That one and Seneca's On the Shortness of Life. Those two are the ones that I give most. Yeah,
the Wisdom of Insecurity is so it's called like a message for an age of anxiety, which is funny because it's written in 1955 or something.
Yeah,
it's
way
so
before our current time, which is
relevant.
So yes, it's very, very relevant.
It's so like even it's somewhere on my like most read stack somewhere next to me. But like the things that he says, I'm like, you could just copy and paste this to 2024. It's so relevant. And I think what I like about him the most is he's able to make you simultaneously understand that none of this matters and that it's going to be okay. And it's a very calming way of looking at the world because we're living in this constant frenetic pace. There's a lot of anxiety. It doesn't seem like there's an age of anxiety. It seems like humans are anxious, period. And I think he has a beautiful way of bringing bringing a soothing tone to your soul. But at the same time, what I love about Alan is that he other people see him as a guru, but he didn't see himself as a guru. You know, he said I can't practice what I preach because I'm not a preacher. You know, and funny enough, he died from complications of alcoholism. You know, and you look at that, and I think that he would think that's funny. You know, I think that he knew that, like, even in The Wisdom of Insecurity, he talks about how the alcoholic's worst thing is doing something that he knows is killing himself, you know, on purpose. And it's like, you're writing about yourself, sir. And but I think even he would think that's funny. It's like you have a person who can tell you what to do, but they're not doing it, but they know they're not doing it because he called it like the irrefutable element of rascality. Like every sage or guru has to have something that grounds them, that makes them part of the earth. Otherwise they just float away, you know? And it's interesting that he died at I think he was like 63 I think he died in like 65 or 66. How old was he? I think he was 58. He's 58 when he died, which then when you look at it, you're like, wow, that's actually young. As I'm 36 now, you're like, that's not that old. And I love how he talks about, you know, he said when he was a kid, he used to think that his grandfather was so wise. Now he's a grandfather. He knows his grandfather was an idiot. And so just that perspective, you know, and it just makes me feel like it's going to be okay.
Yeah, no, I love that idea because I think it's something that I've definitely honed into as I've gotten older, is just like really that idea that like I'm never going to figure it all out. No. I'm never going to understand. I'm always going to be foolish. And
if Alan didn't, what are you even worried about? Like he didn't figure it out. He didn't get it, dude.
Right,
you know?
right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's maybe something I appreciate about Alan as well, is the fact that I feel like similar to Socrates in a lot of ways, that he understood that he didn't know.
Yes.
Right?
I deeply know that I have no idea.
Yeah, I deeply know that I know nothing.
Yeah, and that's,
Yeah.
I think, where we all kind of have to stop, because once you start
Mm-hmm.
going into, oh, I figured something out, that literally means you have not figured it out. That is the whole
Yeah.
thing about the Tao. The Tao that
Yeah.
can be named is not the Tao.
Yeah.
So once you start pointing anything, that's why I've actually stopped talking about psychedelics a lot, because
Mm.
I don't want anyone to think that I know anything, because I don't.
Mm-hmm.
So I've shared a lot of experiences with people, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned there, but I don't really want to be teaching in that way anymore, which is why I'm not doing as much educational content online in terms of like sharing my philosophies as much. Because I think the moment you go out there and you start saying, this is how it is, and this is what it is, and this is what I
Yeah.
learned, it kind of takes away from the sacredness of it all, because you're
Mm.
like, you're taking you're removing your cap and the butterflies are flying out. People have to figure these things out
Yeah.
for themselves.
Yeah.
Like, I can't tell you that I did DMT and this is what about God that it doesn't
Right.
really matter.
Right. Well, and to your point, then people are seeking these substances, or they're seeking whatever it is, whether it's entrepreneurship. I feel like that's such a thing currently right now, is like everybody's seeking something outside of themselves
Yeah.
rather than like cultivating those questions and cultivating like the curiosity. And it's something I, even going back to Socrates a lot. And I often think about my own philosophy professor in college, of just being like, it's really giving you the tools, asking you the questions that make you unpack and realize that you don't know, that can be
Yes.
some of the most valuable insights that you actually
Yes.
have.
Yes. It's dangerous when you start to feel like you know. A lot of the
Yeah.
times like Stuart Wilde says, this is another one of my big influences. He's like, the you're closest to knowing when you're not out there performing. It's not the guy in the robe, the saffron robes and the incense and and the singing in Latin. All that stuff means that you don't know. So just be silent,
Mm.
act like a fool. You hear these like Chinese proverbs of like the genius who acts like a fool,
Mm.
Lao Tzu and all these guys. It's like, I think that's the way to go. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, even in terms of business, this is not something that people want to hear, but like, be comfortable with not winning.
Mm.
Be okay to stand at the back of the line. Say, you go
Mm.
ahead, go in front of me. I'm going to get there anyway, regardless. We don't have to race in. We don't have to race on ClickFunnels. We don't have
Yeah.
to compete. I'm just going where I'm going, and I'll see you there or not.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's beautiful. And I mean, it even raises the question, like, right, like what is there to compete with, or like why is there competition?
Why are
Who are
we?
you competing with?
Who?
Yeah.
For what
Yeah.
reason? To what
Right.
end?
Right.
So you'll also will die. This for why? Why? And in
Mm-hmm.
a few generations, no one is going to know. The furthest I can go back, what's the oldest relative you can name of your own?
I have a some amount of greats. Uncle Brian Boru, who was the last king of Ireland
Ooh,
or Scotland or
that's
something
a
like
good
that,
one. Well, you should probably
who like
know if it's
united them. Yeah, I know. I gotta know
which
it. That
that's
that's
pretty important information.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's pretty cool though. He was like they had it. The Vikings supposedly sent like assassins to kill him in his sleep, and he was like stabbed while sleeping, and then woke up and killed them before dying. That's like the myth for the
Hardcore.
legend. So it's
These
pretty
guys
dope.
come from a different cloth, man.
Yeah, very different background.
He
My
was
grandma
probably
always
like
joked.
19 when it happened too. They're
Yeah,
obviously
probably.
young.
I mean, my grandma always joked like all it took to be a king then was to have 3 pigs at the time. So like, who knows how powerful he was? But yeah, that's my most ancient ancestor that I know of.
That's further than I know. I know my great great grandmother Agnes Zobel, and I don't know anything before that.
Hmm.
So it's like, we're all that the whole idea of like leaving a legacy.
Hmm.
Even Alexander the Great, it's like fantastic. I watched a reenactment of you on Netflix. Who gives a shit?
Yeah. Or
So
what was his last name? That's one of my favorite questions
yeah,
when people bring that up. Yeah.
yeah. Actually, that's a good question. What was it? I guess he probably had many royal last names, because
Sure.
I'm sure it wasn't like Smith or something. But yeah, who
Yeah.
knows? Who cares? You wouldn't even recognize him if you saw him on the street, because we don't even know what he looked like, really.
Yeah.
So I think the striving for a legacy part is kind of just there's a lot of vanity behind that,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just not necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Um, what, if anything, is your biggest disagreement with Alan Watts?
I've never. Well, no, that's not true. Well, going back on like his early demise at 58, I would think that there is a value in longevity, right? Like I think sometimes I think certain people come into this world, they burn really hot and they flame out early. I mean, even Tupac, died at 25 and he put out all this work, and he burned really hot while he was here. But I think there is something to, I think as much as it doesn't matter, the equal is an opposite is true. It does matter.
Mm-hmm.
And so through our interactions with the world, we are creating changes in others, whether that's conscious or unconscious. And the more positive changes you can help people to create, the wider your ripple is going to be. So, don't burn up too fast is what I would tell Papa Watts, because he could still be here now and that could be a positive thing for us. A lot of people that are of his caliber don't kill themselves. They get taken out by someone else. So if you're not going to get taken out by someone else, you might as well stick around. Because I think, could use his wisdom in the age of insecurity. He might already be dead. I mean, if he was 58 in the 60s, he'd be old or dead now, but he could have lasted for longer. And that could have benefited us all. A lot of the guys who are of his caliber get taken out early because people don't like that message. But yeah, I think that, just slow down a little bit, slow down. There's no rush to get off the earth plane, stick around a little bit, Socrates,
No, I love that. I'm curious, how do you personally deal with that like dynamic tension between nothing matters and everything matters?
Man, do you read any Nietzsche?
I haven't, no.
I'm not like well versed in his stuff, but I do. It's either Nietzsche or Dostoevsky, who is saying like the ultimate philosophical question is, why not suicide? Why not kill yourself? And I thought it was interesting. Honestly, I think it's a day-to-day thing. For me, I've always had like a very buoyant, upward trajectory personality, so it's natural for me to want to keep progressing. But I think there is a tension between everything and nothing matters. And I go through phases, which is why sometimes I don't want to be on social anymore, which is like I joke with my wife. I'm like, I don't want anybody to view me right now. I don't want anybody to see me. And I think that you just have to be okay with where you're at and how you're feeling about that. You don't have to make yourself care about something you don't. You don't have to force yourself to feel like it matters if you don't. And I think that even the idea that there should be tension between it matters and it doesn't matter is probably a false dichotomy, because it's part of, because it doesn't matter, that will remind you why it does, because it does matter will remind you why it doesn't. So it's not like either or, it's just this ongoing thing. One implies the other, right? So it's just being, it's just matter. And it's just, the fact that there is something implies that there's also nothing. It's so, don't try too hard to make yourself feel like this is too important. And usually after you've gone through a dark night of the soul or depression or something like that, when you come out on the other side, you'll see why some of the darkness was there, and it will shed light on the things that are important to you. And it's okay to go through phases where you feel helpless or useless or fill in the blankless.
Can you share about like one dark night of the soul moment that you had that led to that healing on the other side?
Yeah, man. I think that just in general, I think that 2022 to even earlier this year was it's just a low period of there's like energetic lows and there's also depression. And so I think that I went from an energetic low of like, I don't know what I should be doing with myself, to now I'm in depression. And what I learned through that process, well, first of all, I'm not clinically depressed. I'm not sure if I would have been diagnosed as clinically depressed at that time. I can just tell you that what I found interesting about that experience, even while I was in it, I could say, have you ever been like actually depressed before, like a real depression? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know like if I would be considered clinically depressed, but definitely through bouts of depression or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah,
like what
periods of time.
I thought was interesting was that the depression and sadness are obviously not the same thing. I mean, to you that might be obvious, but to someone who's maybe never experienced it, it's not the same thing. It's not like, oh shucks, that didn't work out, or I'm feeling sad today. It's like, it's a lowered vibrational state that's consistent over a period of time that you don't feel like is going to resolve itself naturally. But even when I was in that experience, just because, I built my career on one thing and I didn't know what I was going to do for the next thing. And, I was working on my relationship and things weren't going the way I wanted it, or family things were going on and it was really bothering me. And so like all these things came together. And what I thought was interesting, even that experience, was I was like, wow, this isn't something that you can think your way out of in a way. And that was an interesting learning experience because I had to feel my way out of it. And I just had to check in with myself. And I had to learn to be okay with having a lower amount of energy. I had to be okay with being in a lower state and not be like, within the entrepreneurship community, especially in the positive mindset, it's like, just go out there and get it. Tackle the day. Lewis Howes,
Right.
School of Greatness. It's like, that's not, you're faking it, guys. Like, it's okay to say, I'm depressed right now, or I'm not feeling good, or whatever. And I think that it was great for me to understand that contrast so that I could be more empathetic to others, and so that I could also have a truer gauge of if you're playing on the piano and you only play these keys up here and you never have played those keys on there, you don't really know the totality of your instrument. So the human is an instrument. It has all these different ways that they can sound and play and feel. None of it's wrong. No one would say, oh, a minor chord is wrong. It's just a minor chord. A minor chord also implies a major chord, right? So they go together. You literally can't have positive emotion without negative emotion. They're, the teeth can't bite themselves. The tongue can't lick itself. It's all the same thing. So Alan Watts is the best at making these analogies, by the way, like these whole, the tongue can't lick itself, can it? Your left hand can't give itself a handshake. And so all these things are required for any of it to exist. So that made me feel a little bit better because I started to realize, depression implies lightness, and that didn't necessarily get me out of the depression, but with that perspective, I was able to accept it. And by learning to accept it, I wasn't resisting it because the resistance often makes it worse. So it's like, even in jujitsu, it's like when you're grabbing onto someone, you're attached to them and now they're attached to you. When you're pushing against something, by you pushing against it, it's pushing back on you. And so if you release that tension, it dissipates. And I think that it's one thing to say I'm depressed. It's another thing to say I'm depressed and I shouldn't feel like this. Because now you're layering a judgment on top of a state. The state is natural. The judgment is self-imposed. And then you're trying to unravel this yarn of like, I feel mad at myself that I'm depressed and that's making me anxious. And it's just not useful.
Yeah. I'm mad at myself for being angry. Yeah. I'm mad at myself for that. And then, right. Yeah.
Right.
No,
And
absolutely.
And now I'm feeling anxious because I'm keyed up because I've been mad all week. And it's just like, just allow yourself to feel whatever it is. Let it flow through you, and see where it lands. But of course, it's all talking. If you're in a really serious place, it can be a lot harder than that. But that's the truth of it.
Yeah. Well said.